slides anymore. Use the poll. Come on. We're talking about before and after triggers. Before is when you want to make a change to the records that you are saving or creating or whatnot. Remember, they are, you didn't have to do any DML. If you saw the demo that I did just before launch, we just had updated the field, the billing country, and that's it. No, we didn't have to do an update or DML because we were already in the context of a save operation. Now, if you want to create an account and automatically create a contact for that account, you're going to create an after trigger on the account object. So after insert of account, and on the after insert, you have access to those fields, like DD, for example. Then you can use that as the foreign key of the contact that you are also creating. All right. Whenever you're building a trigger, you have to ask yourself 4 basic questions. First question is, on what type of S object does the operation should happen? For example, creating an account and automatically creating a contact. Should that be a trigger on contact? Should that be a trigger on account? And if you answer account, you are correct. Now, what is the triggering DML event? And we have 4 options: insert, update, delete, undelete. Are you going to be building a before or an after trigger? And remember, the question here is what you're going to be doing with the trigger. If you're going to update records, then it's probably going to be a before. If you're going to create other records, then it's going to be an after. And then, last but not least, is, okay, what's the outcome of the trigger? What do you want the trigger to do? So when you build triggers, as you saw on the previous demo just before launch, you have 4 different options. You have 4 different triggers: insert, update, delete, undelete. Now, they could be either before or after. So how do you know in the code that is inside the trigger if you're running on a before or if you're running on an after, or if you're doing an insert or whatnot? There are some variables inside the trigger that gives you this particular information. As we saw earlier on the demo, I used a trigger that is update. No, it's before is what I did. Now, we also saw that triggers works with a collection of records. That's why I was able to do trigger.new and look through those records. Trigger.new is a list of records. Trigger.new map is a collection of records. Now, in the before insert, the record has not been assigned an ID. Therefore, the trigger doesn't have a way of knowing the ID of the record in the before insert. And the map, which is a key value collection of entries, you have a key value pair. You have the key is going to be your ID, and then the value is going to be the account itself. But in a before insert, you do not have a key. Therefore, you do not have that map. Trigger.alt and trigger.all map are basically the same type of collections. One is a list, one is a map. And basically, they contain the information of the record as it was when the transaction started. Trigger.new is the information of the record as they will be saved to a database when the transaction completes. Trigger.new is the original version, and trigger.new is the new version of the record. And there's other variables that you may have as well, including, for example, is executed and whatnot. There's a few more. So let's take a look at this little piece of code here. We're going to have a trigger on the course delivery, on before insert and before update. Basically, the question is, what's the information that will be in the trigger.new, and what's the information that's going to be on the trigger.old? So when we create a record and we specify that it's February 2nd, 2020, you will have, in the trigger.new, you have the record which that particular date, February 2nd. Trigger.old is does not even exist. So the value of trigger.old is actually null. It's not an empty list. It's undefined. It's null. So you cannot do trigger.old.size if you're on an insert. Now, if you make a change to that record and you change the date to March 2nd, 2020, trigger.new will contain March 2nd because that's going to be the version of the record that will be saved into the database. Trigger.old is the original version of the record, which was February 2nd, 2020. The next thing that we need to talk about is the order of execution. Extremely important. Actually, there is several questions on the exam related to this next section. Safe order of execution describes the events, the series of events that occur on the Salesforce platform when a record has been saved. So you go to a page layout and you go to the edit page and you start filling some information and you click on the submit button. When you do that, that information goes through the internet, it gets to Salesforce, and there is a series of events that occur in the Salesforce platform when the record gets saved. And that is described on this little picture. Now, in the next slides, we'll go through each of these little bubbles and talk about what each little bubble does and what it means and what is important about that. Now, notice that there are two particular spaces or places on this particular picture where the record is actually saved to a database or committed to a database. There may be multiple saves, so you have to be a bit careful with that. And there's going to be only one single commit, which happens at the very, very end of your Apex transaction. Now, which business processes are part of the safe order of execution? There is a document. There is a document. Let me find that document. There's a document, triggers an order of execution, with lists 20 different steps that happens in order, always the same steps, when the records are being saved to the database. So this is what is called the triggers an order of execution. This is what you're going to be tested on. It's a very long list and it's hard to remember it. So what we're gonna do, couple people in LACA, 2 in APAC. Nice. All right. Trigger an order of execution. Let's make this bold. dev4 friends. Yeah, I made a poll just during the lunch break asking where you were located, where were you calling us from? I just want to have a sense. And I see that 2 people are calling from APAC. Good job on staying up in the middle of the night. This must be really hard for you guys. So good. All right, cool. Now, if you want to down on the bottom comment and put your countries that you're actually calling from, that would be even, or maybe the states or cities that you're calling from, that would be cool to know where you guys are calling from. All right, good. Most of you from the US, as expected, because of the different time zones, of course. All right, cool. So let's continue with this list. So that list of, hold on, I'm not showing what I need to show. Hold on, 1 second. hit the wrong button. There you go. I'm here. All right, good. So that list that we saw has 20 steps. Now there is supposed to be 20 bubbles on this thing, this ring that we talked about earlier. We only took the most important one of those steps, and we created a little bubble for that. But you need to go through all the 20 steps, and you need to understand what is going on. Yeah, for simplification, we just did a handful here, not all of them. Most of them, but not all of them. So let's go through this presentation and this animation, whatever, and go through the order of steps, one of those, each of those 20 steps one by one. So when you save a record, you could either be inserting a record or updating a record. So if you're doing an insert, it will create a new object. If you're doing an update, it will go to the database and bring the records that are on the database. That basically gives you access to trigger that old. Once the record has been, the old record has been loaded, it creates a copy of that in memory and puts the new values of what the user just entered on the screen into those particular records. And it will do a system validations. The next thing it will do is invoke your before triggers. Remember what a before trigger does? It's the possibility of making changes to the records that are going to be saved to the database. Once all the before triggers for that particular object, that particular event has been executed, then it will run most system validations steps again and custom validations. Now, let me rewind a little bit and talk about here, where's my mouse? Talk about here that when you load the values and it performs system validations from the UI. On the page layout, you can make the field be required or not. That's basically that validation that runs in there. After the before trigger, later than the before trigger, then you're gonna run system validations again, most, because we're not doing the ones on the page layout. We're just using the ones that the field is actually required, or where the field is actually required. Hold on, I lost my thought. Runs most system validation steps again and run some custom validations. So it will run if the field is required, if it is a date, cannot specify month 13. If it is a number, it cannot have a word, all of that type of things in there will be done. And also, it will run your custom invalidation rules. Once that is done, the next thing that it will do is execute your duplicate rules. And then it saves the record. But before we go into the saving, let's take a look at a very simple scenario. Let's suppose that the user saves a course delivery record. The record passes all system validations. Then a before trigger is executed. After the before trigger, there is going to be their system validations running, but they fail because there was a required field that was not populated. Who cleared the field? And if you're thinking the before trigger, you're absolutely correct, because that's the only thing that it's allowed in these particular steps to make changes to those fields. So once the record has been saved, it will then execute the after triggers. Once that is done, it will go to the workflow rules and execute those. Now, I know what you guys may be thinking right now. Why did I make such a fuss? that do not think about what time the triggers run and which one runs first and which one runs second. If you can see clearly on the picture that the before happens at an earlier time than the after trigger. And then you may be right. You may be right in the sense that yes, in this picture, the before runs first and the after runs second. But if the workflow rule has a field update, which makes a change to the field, then you're going to run your before trigger. You're going to run most system validations, not the custom validations. You're going to save the record, and then you're going to execute the after update trigger. So yes, although it is true that you do run your before here and your after here, you run your before, which runs at a later time than the after. So the after runs before runs after the after, which runs before after the before after runs after the after before the after. Yeah, make sense? No, it does not. So do not think about when they run. Think about what you do with the fact that they are different, and one allows you to update the record, and one allows you to work with related records. Once the process has been completed, once the workflow has been completed, then you execute the process flow rules. Again, if the process flow updates a field, you will run your before system and custom validations, save the record to the database, and then run your after triggers. In the workflow, we had a little triangle, kind of like this, but these validations only run the system. In the process, this triangle runs the system and the custom validation rule. All right. Good. Once that is done, we'll do the roll-up summary fields. If this is a detail that we're inserting, we have to go to the parent, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Then you do your criteria-based sharing rules, and last but not least, you execute any post-commit. You commit, and then you perform any post-commit logic. Now, what about those roll-up summary fields that I saw in a little bubble just before? Yes. If we're going through the detailed record, master detail, if we go through the detailed record, and there is a roll-up summary field, then a new ring for the master will be executed, including the triggers for the master, before and after triggers for the master, with one huge exception. The commit does not happen here. There will only be in total one single commit at the very, very, very end of everything. All right, and that is the order of execution. And there's a couple trails for you on that. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a look at the user interface. We're going to talk about things that include how to describe the Salesforce using a Visualforce page. How to describe the types of web content that can be incorporated into Visualforce pages. Describe how to incorporate the Visualforce page in a Salesforce application. And from this section, from the logic and process automation, we're going to include topics which include describing how to write the Visualforce controllers. Describe when and how to use the standard Visualforce controllers versus Apex custom controllers and controller extensions. Describe the benefits of the Lightning component framework, and describe the resources that can be contained in a Lightning component. This unit, user interface, is 10% of the exam. So let's begin with Visualforce pages. Here you see two pieces of code. On the top, you see a Visualforce page. On the bottom, you see the controller in Apex for that particular Visualforce page. How do I know that it's a controller for that? Because in Visualforce, we have the controller, which invokes a myController_cc, which is this class here. You can build or you can use the model view controller either kind of out of the box or using Visualforce pages. Out of the box, your model will contain your data. Your view will contain your page layouts, and your controller will have a controller, a standard controller, which your page layouts uses. So Visualforce created some controllers that you can use on your Visualforce pages, which are being used by the page layouts. When we're talking about Visualforce, the model is going to be the same thing, your standard and custom objects. The view can actually now be Visualforce pages, so you can create your own custom pages. The controller, if you want the standard behavior, then you can use a standard controller. If you want special behavior, then you can build your own custom controllers, either custom controllers or controller extensions. Now, in Visualforce, the way that you're going to reference to your fields is through using the expression syntax, which is basically using a curly brackets, exclamation mark, and curly brackets. And everything between that will be evaluated. In this case, we have a standard controller course, __c, and the field duration for that course. And this element will allow us to enter the information for that. Now, there are other global variables that you can use. You can do a $user, $page, $resource. The way you're going to access your Visualforce pages is you as a developer, when you're testing this, you can easily go into the URL and type the URL for that, which basically is force.com/apex/overquickEdit. But you cannot expect your users to do those type of strings on your query strings on the browser. So what you're going to ask them to do is either you're going to click the button, or you can use the view, which you have overridden with your Visualforce page, or you can create your own tab. Or you can include Visualforce page inside a page layout, or you can create a custom action, or you can create a mobile card.
All done.
Now, talking about the controllers that go behind scenes on a Visualforce page, we have Visualforce controllers, which could be either standard controllers written by Salesforce, custom controllers written by you in Apex, and which could also be controller extensions also written in Apex by you. So in here, in this particular example, we see that in the constructor, we're making a SOCO query. We're putting here the colon to precede that with a value that we're getting from the URL, from the ID parameter of the URL for the current page. As we mentioned in SOCO queries allows you to get data from related records, but only going down one level or going up 5 levels. So if we go in help and we want to get information from the contact and the account, we can do that because we're actually going only 2 levels up. And from here, from the attempt, 1 to element, 2 to certification, 2 elements up, 2 levels up, and we can do 5. Now, from the certification, we can go down 2 elements, but we cannot go down to attempt because I will be going 2 elements down. And we're not allowed to do that. We're only allowed to do 1 level down. So depending on how you want your queries to be built, you have to be careful and specify which controller you want and where you want to start from. Now, you can use the standard controllers even for custom objects. And all you really need to do is Apex page standard controller equals double quotes my object underscore C if it is a custom object, or account if it is a standard object. And what the standard controller does, it takes a look at the ID parameter on your query string and takes the parameter and it goes and performs a query for the fields that it needs to look for. It also not only queries, but it actually can perform other operations for you, including here at the bottom, save, quick save, edit, delete, cancel, list, and view, and a couple more. And what it does, what you can do with Visual Force is you can create a button. So with a gray box, you click on it, you will be able to invoke the action, in this particular case, edit. So it will navigate to the edit page and allows you to enter data for that. Now you can create command buttons or command links, which are basically text and underlined and in blue letters usually. You can also have actions on a page, which is basically like the onload. You can have an action function, which allows you to easily call from JavaScript a function that calls to your controller, and the controller performs the operation on behalf of the JavaScript function. Action support allows you to enable on-click, on mouse over, on focus, on lost focus, on all the different DOM events. Last but not least, we have action poller, which periodically calls an action. Last but not least, we have action poller, which periodically calls an action. Last but not least, we have action poller, which periodically calls an action. Last but not least, we have action, which periodically calls an action. No, that is not a problem in the issue on the webinar with the audio. I'm actually trying to be silly here to give a point that action poller will periodically ping your controller to perform some type of operation as needed. So, for example, you can every half a minute or every minute, you can save the information that the user has typed on the record itself. All right, good. So kind of on the same way that we worked with Apex, you can go 5 levels up, 1 level down. On Visual Force pages, you can do exactly the same thing. So if we start in a standard controller contact, like in the first example here, we go from that particular record up to the account, up to the owner, that's following 2 relationships, and get the first name of the owner of the account for this contact. Or we can go down and we can loop, and this is one of the looping mechanisms. We have a few of those. Page lock is probably one of the nicest to looking one, which also gives you some UI. But basically what it is you're going to be iterating over a list of contacts for this particular account. As I mentioned before, you can only go 1 level down. You cannot go 2 levels down. So if you needed to go to 2 levels down, you're going to have to write your own Apex and write your formula or your SOCO queries so that it's able to get the health records from the contact 1 level down for the account that you're viewing right now. All right, cool. Now what you're going to do is you're going to have to write a getter or a setter, or even better, you can use a properties, and you also have action methods. Action methods are the ones that are being invoked from a button, a command link, a poller, a action function, a on page that we saw earlier. And the idea is that your return type for that particular method gotta be a page reference. Controllers do 2 things in Salesforce. They manage not only access to the data for the view, but also control the navigation. And the way you control the navigation is you're going to be returning a page reference element. If the functionality that you need to accomplish is not provided through standard controller, then at that point, only at that point, you should have to go to Apex, not before. Try not to write too much Apex. I know I'm teaching you Apex and I'm helping you prepare for the certification exam on Apex, and you will be certified saying that you can write Apex. But one of the most important questions that you should be able to answer in the exam is when not to write Apex. Can we use a standard controller, or do we have to build a controller extension? Do we have can we build a standard controller, a custom controller, or a controller extension? And there are 4 different scenarios. You want to create a quick create page that allows the user to create an account, contact, opportunity, all of that on one single page. Standard controller can obviously not do that because standard controller only works with one record. So if you had a page for accounts, sure. Another one for contact, sure. Another for opportunity, absolutely. But not one for all 3 of them. So the other option is, can we have a controller extension? Usually controller extensions extends the standard controller. And it's typically used, a controller extension, it's used when you want to use a standard controller. And you want to use a standard controller because your page is going to be associated with one object. So if you want to be able to click on a button on the account, you want to be able to replace the account page. You want to be able to insert the Visualforce inside a page layout for the account. You have to use a standard controller account. And for this logic of create multiple records, you will have to write some Apex. Now the question is, do you write the controller extension? Do you write a custom controller then? Well, if you think about this page, that it's one single page that is able to be executed from the account, the contact, and the opportunity, you cannot have a standard controller. You cannot have a standard controller account because then you will not be able to create a button on the contact to do that. Most likely, this is not really going to be related to any of those objects. It's going to be in the UI, it's going to be associated with a new custom tab. And in that case, we can build a custom controller because we're not extending a standard controller. You want to create a page with a custom functionality that can be launched using a button or a page layout. Based on what I just said, you're going to be building a controller extension. You're going to have a standard controller for the object that you are adding the button to, and probably not really have the logic in there, but move it into the controller extension. You want a multi-page wizard which guides the user through the process of designing a sales plan for a customer. This sounds awful similar to the first scenario, where you're going to be creating accounts, contact opportunities, all that stuff in a wizard now. Well, in the wizard, you're probably going to have a tab for that, so you're going to create a controller extension. A page that, on saving a new certification record, automatically redirects the user to a page where they can create a new related certification record. You want to change the navigation, but this needs to be a page that is going to be on the certification record. So we're going to use the standard controller and write the navigation logic on the controller extension. That covers Visualforce. So now let's go in and take a look at the next section here, which is on Lightning Components Framework. The Lightning Component Framework, and in this case, just a little parenthesis, when we talk about the Lightning Component Framework, we're talking primarily about the Lightning Aura component framework. There is another framework, very, very new, about a year old, called Lightning Web Component Framework. They are very, very similar between Aura and Web Component. So some of the things that we talk about are applicable to both of them, but they're applicable to both of them. I was going to say I lost my train of thought again. Aura and Web, 2 frameworks that are very similar but very different from Visualforce. The thing is that I'm thinking about doing a little demo with check if I'm gonna do that. I was just trying to check the time. It is 1:21. We have some slides to go. No, I think unfortunately I'm not gonna have time for that demo. I wanted to do a demo that will take me about 10 minutes to compare and contrast the difference between Visualforce and the Lightning components. At the end, Eric, you there?
Yes, I am.
This webinar goes until 3 p.m., right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So no, I don't have much time for more things. All right, cool. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So an hour and a half. All right. So let's talk about the Lightning component framework. It is a UI framework that allows you to develop responsive, dynamic web applications that runs on Salesforce platform and can easily access data in a Salesforce org. Now, it is responsive because it uses relative sizing. So if you were to see on an iPad, for example, or a desktop or whatnot, and a website that is responsive, the sizing will actually change, and the screen will be adjusted to a resolution as you flip them from vertical to horizontal resolutions. It also allows you to use different styles based on the context. So an application on the desktop will show you different styles, although that's technically not really responsive, but more adaptive website. But it's basically kind of the same idea. And it uses flexible scaling for images and media. So if you view the same application on your desktop, on a tablet or a phone or your iWatch, then the size of the pictures should adjust accordingly. So that's basically what I mean by a responsive site. Now, with Lightning components, you can build either something that runs on the side, which is most of it, with languages like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And for the data and the data only, you can actually go to Apex and get some records or whatnot. Comparing Visualforce and Lightning, Visualforce is page-centric. The servers have all the information, so which means that the clients are stateless, or basically dumb. And they are great for, Visualforce is great for creating pages that are going to be accessed via desktop. Not really for these particular reasons that we just described, really appropriate to do this for a mobile application. Runs awfully slow. All right, now the next thing is Lightning is what we call app-centric. So it is an application where with building different components, we assemble a full page, and we can easily swap components in and out of a page. And that is basically what is called an app-centric rather than a page-centric. Now, the stateless servers and stateful clients is because all the logic has moved down to the client. So the servers are basically dumbed down servers, and the clients are very smart. And it is great for mobile application development because once you have your application running, it doesn't have to go to the server through the 3G network connection to get the data for that you're trying to see. All right. So which of these Visualforce or Lightning applies to these four different sections here? So Lightning aligns with Salesforce long-term user interface. It also enables non-developers to build applications by assembling existing components. You get some pieces and you put them together like a puzzle. It is the best choice for building communities because the community builder allows you to integrate things together like components very easily, and has fast performance, especially in a mobile, because you don't have to go through a slow network connection to the server to get some of the easy things done here. Now, With that said, Visualforce is still good for rendering PDFs. It's less complex on the code, definitely, and can be used to override standard buttons in Salesforce Classic. Now, Lightning components can override buttons on Lightning Experience, but Visualforce for Lightning for Salesforce Classic. With Lightning framework, you can build one of two different things. You can build a Lightning application. You can build a Lightning component. A Lightning application is your full HTML page, the entire document. That is going to be your Lightning application. Basically, you cannot have an application inside another application because it wouldn't be the second one. The one that's inside wouldn't be the outermost shell, which is what the Lightning applications are. Lightning components have to be put inside something, either another Lightning component or a Lightning application in order to be able to run. All right, good. So next, this little picture shows you the architecture for a very simple set of components that you're building with your Lightning framework. On your left, you have the outermost shell, which is the application, which does have a URL. You cannot put an application inside the application because I would not have the URL. And inside the application, you can put components, or you can put components inside a component, inside a component, inside a component, inside an application. As many levels down as you need. Now, your component, it's able to talk to Apex to get data, as long as the methods are annotated with a particular annotation called the OR enabled. By the way, this applies to both the Apex side of the Lightning OR and the Lightning Web Components, exactly the same thing. Both of them require to have the methods OR enabled. So what you end up building with Lightning components is a bundle. These two bundles are in Lightning Aura components to indicate the pieces, the most important pieces of the component or an application on the developer console. This is kind of what they look like. Now, we call them a bundle. It's basically a folder. And the bundle has resources, which basically files. So bundle, resource, folder, file, basically the same thing. So what are the elements or the resources of the component bundle? Or what are the files in the component folder? First and foremost, we have the component. This is where you put your markup. This is what defines the UI. Then JavaScript will be placed on the controller and the helper. The helper is, think about the controllers as triggers, and helpers like the trigger handler classes that you build. Okay, this is probably the closest comparison that I can get that I have been able to think about. Controllers will be responding to events. When you click a button, you're going to call it a function and controller. The function and controller will call to perform the business logic. Will invoke the helper. Last in this little section is the style. This is where you put your CSS, the elements that change the color and the size of your elements, basically. And then you have other elements, which, although they are important, they're not frequently used. If you want to learn more about Lightning components, there is and Visualforce, which we just covered in this section. There is two trails, Visualforce Basic and Lightning Components Basic. All right, next section, testing. We covered 12% of the exam on this section called testing.